What if the reason your lavender looks tired, leggy, or half dead right now has nothing to do with the heat? Most people assume lavender is dying because summer is brutal. So they water more, they worry more. Some even give up and pull it out. But here's what almost nobody realizes: late July is actually the moment that decides whether your lavender thrives for the next 3 years or slowly declines no matter what you do. The problem is that most people were never taught how lavender actually works. It's not a needy plant. It's not a fragile plant. It's a plant with very specific rules, and July is when those rules matter most. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what your lavender needs right now, before the month runs out, including one thing almost everyone gets backwards: the exact opposite of what most gardening advice tells you to do with watering. Let's start with the one thing that quietly kills more lavender than anything else. One, it needs you to stop rescuing it with water. Here's the symptom. Your lavender's leaves are turning yellow or grey at the base. Some branches feel soft, and the whole plant looks like it's wilting even though you've been watering it faithfully. Most people see wilting and think one thing: it's thirsty. So they water more. Here's the surprising part: that's usually the exact opposite of what's happening. Lavender comes from the dry, rocky hillsides of the Mediterranean. Its roots didn't evolve to sit in moisture. They evolved to survive drought. Think of lavender's roots less like a sponge and more like a set of lungs. They need to breathe air just as much as they need water. When soil stays wet, those roots literally suffocate. They can't take in oxygen, so they start to rot. And a rotting root can't send water up to the leaves at all, which is why the plant wilts. It looks thirsty while it's actually drowning. This is where almost everyone gets it wrong. The plant is showing you a drought symptom, so you respond with more water, which makes the actual problem worse. The fix is simple. Only water lavender when the top 2 to 3 inches of soil are completely dry. For most established plants in July, that often means once a week, sometimes even less. If you're not sure, stick your finger in the soil before you touch the hose. Dry means water. Cool and damp means walk away. Healthy lavender roots aren't thirsty roots. They're roots that get to dry out between drinks. Now that we've dealt with water, let's talk about something that quietly starves lavender even when you're feeding it well. Because this next one surprises almost everyone. 2, it needs you to stop feeding it. Your lavender is growing tall, soft and leafy, but the flower spikes are short, sparse, or falling over. Most people think more growth means a healthier plant, so they add fertilizer to keep it going. But here's the twist. Extra fertilizer, especially anything high in nitrogen, is often the reason blooms disappear in the first place. Think of a lavender plant like a person choosing between 2 jobs: building muscle or building a family. When nitrogen is abundant, the plant puts its energy into leafy green growth, because that's the cheap option. Producing flowers takes far more energy than producing leaves. So when there's plenty of fuel for easy growth, the plant simply skips the expensive project. It doesn't need to bloom to survive, so it doesn't bother. That explains why the fed, watered, well-cared-for lavender plant is often the one with the fewest flowers. The fix couldn't be easier. Stop fertilizing lavender altogether, especially from midsummer onward. In fact, most lavender never needs feeding in typical garden soil. If anything, work a little sand or gravel into the base to keep the soil lean and poor, the way lavender actually prefers it. Lavender doesn't bloom because it's well fed. It blooms because it has to. That takes care of feeding. But even lavender that's watered correctly and never fertilized can still struggle because of something happening below the surface that most people never check. 3. It needs soil that drains like a colander. Not a bowl. The symptom here is subtle. The plant looks fine after rain, but a few days later, it suddenly droops or the lower leaves go brown, even though nothing about your watering changed. Most people blame the weather. It rained too much, they say, and move on. But here's the real problem. It's not how much water falls. It's how long that water sticks around. Regular garden soil, especially soil with a lot of clay, acts like a bowl. Water pools at the bottom and stays there. Lavender's roots weren't built for that. They're built for soil that acts like a colander. Water passes straight through, and only a thin film clings to the roots before draining away. When water pools around lavender roots, even for a day or two, it triggers the same suffocation and rot we talked about with overwatering. Except this time you didn't even do anything wrong with the hose. The soil itself is the problem. The fix is a one-time investment that pays off for years. Mix coarse sand, small gravel, or perlite into the planting area, especially in the top 12 inches of soil. If you're planting new lavender, consider a slightly raised bed or mound so water has somewhere to go besides straight down into a clay pocket. Lavender doesn't care how much rain falls, it only cares how fast that rain leaves. We've fixed what's happening underground. Now let's look up, because the next thing your lavender needs is something most people assume they already have enough of. 4. It needs full unfiltered sun. Not pretty good sun. Here's the symptom. The plant is alive. It's even green. But it's floppy, sparse, and the flowers are pale and few, even though it gets sun for part of the day. Most people think a few hours of morning sun, or bright, indirect light near a fence, counts as enough. Here's what most people never realize. Lavender isn't just a sun-loving plant. It's closer to being solar-powered. Every flower spike it produces is essentially stored sunlight, converted into fragrant oil and color. When sunlight is limited, the plant simply doesn't generate enough energy to fund the expensive project of blooming, so it puts out thin, leggy stems instead, stretching toward whatever light it can find. That stretching is actually the plant telling on itself. Leggy, floppy lavender is almost always a light problem wearing a disguise. The fix is to be honest about your plant's real sun exposure. Lavender needs a minimum of 6 hours of direct, unobstructed sunlight, and it genuinely performs best with 8 or more. If your plant is tucked near a wall, under a tree's afternoon shadow, or blocked by taller plants nearby, this July is the time to either move it or clear the competition around it. Lavender doesn't grow toward water. It grows toward light, because light is what it's actually running on. So far, we've covered water, food, soil, and light, the basics almost every plant needs. But lavender has a few needs that are unique to how it's built, starting with something happening in the middle of the plant right now. 5. It needs a summer haircut before it gets woody. The symptom shows up over years, not days. The center of the plant looks bare and stick-like. Flowers only appear on the outer edges, and the whole shape starts to look like a small, sad bush instead of the rounded mound it used to be. Most people think this is just old age. Lavender gets woody eventually. Nothing to be done. But here's the surprising part, that woodiness isn't inevitable. It's usually the result of never being pruned at the right time. Picture lavender's growth like a hedge that only grows outward from wherever it was last cut. Every year you don't prune, the plant adds another ring of woody stem at the base and pushes new growth further and further to the outside. After a few years, the center becomes permanently bare wood that can never sprout leaves again, no matter how much you water, feed, or love it. This is exactly why late July matters so much. Right after the first big bloom flush fades, the plant is still actively growing but hasn't gone dormant yet, which means it can recover and push out fresh growth from a haircut. The fix? Right now, trim off the spent flower spikes along with about 1/3 of the green growth, shaping the plant into a tidy mound. Never cut into the bare, woody part with no leaves. It won't recover from there. You're shaping the green, not attacking the wood. A lavender plant that's cut every summer stays full for a decade. A lavender plant that's never cut is often dead in 4 or 5 years. Now that we've shaped the plant, let's talk about the space around it. Because lavender needs something from its neighbors, 2-6, it needs room to breathe literally. The symptom is fuzzy gray or white patches on the leaves, or a musty smell near the base of the plant, especially after a humid stretch. Most people assume this is a bug problem and reach for an insecticide. Actually, this usually isn't insects at all. It's fungus, and it's a direct result of stagnant humid air trapped around the plant. Here's the part that's easy to miss. Lavender evolved on open windswept hillsides, not in crowded garden beds. When it's planted too close to other plants, or when its own branches get thick and congested, air stops moving through it. Moisture from rain, dew, or humidity gets trapped inside that dense foliage instead of drying off. And that trapped moisture is exactly what fungus needs to take hold. The fix has two parts. First, when you're planting or spacing lavender, give each plant at least 18 to 24 inches from its neighbors. Second, that summer prune we just talked about isn't only for shape thinning out the plant, also opens up airflow through the middle, which helps it dry out faster after rain. Crowded lavender isn't just competing for sunlight, it's trapping the exact moisture that causes it to rot from the inside. We're almost through the list. And this last one is the one people are most surprised to hear about in the middle of summer. 7. It needs you to start thinking about winter. Now there's no visible symptom for this one yet, and that's exactly the problem. Everything looks fine in July, so nobody thinks about it, right up until the plant fails to come back in spring. Most people assume winter survival depends on how well they protect the plant once it gets cold. But here's the truth, almost nobody tells you by the time it's actually cold outside, it's too late to influence how well your lavender survives. The real decision gets made in mid to late summer. Here's why. Lavender needs a certain amount of time with mature, hardened stems before the first frost hits. Soft, brand new growth that's still tender going into winter is far more likely to die back, sometimes taking the whole plant with it. That's why pruning in late summer, not early fall, matters so much. It gives the plant enough time to grow back and toughen up those stems before cold weather arrives, instead of heading into winter with fresh, vulnerable growth. So the fix is really about timing everything else we've already talked about. Get your summer prune done now, before the end of July, rather than waiting until September. Ease off water and skip any fertilizing from here on, since both encourage the kind of soft, late growth that struggles in winter. Basically, you're not doing anything new here, you're making sure everything else on this list happens on time. A lavender plant that's shaped, fed nothing extra, and left slightly stressed in late summer is a lavender plant that walks into winter ready for it. Here's the thing worth remembering. If your lavender has been struggling, it's probably not 10 things going wrong at once. It's usually just 1 or 2 of these: too much water, not enough sun, or soil that never learned to drain quietly, working against everything else you're doing right. You don't have a black thumb. You just inherited advice that was written for houseplants, not for a plant built to survive on a dry hillside. So don't try to fix everything today. Pick the one thing from this list that sounded the most familiar. The one where you thought, oh, that's me, and just handle that one this week. Lavender responds fast once its real needs are met, and it's honestly satisfying to watch a plant go from struggling to thriving once you stop fighting its nature and start working with it. If this helped you see your lavender differently, stick around and subscribe, because next time, we're getting into the pruning mistake that turns healthy lavender into a woody, hollow shell, and exactly how to avoid it.